The November rain fell in silver threads across the Connecticut countryside, draping Ashworth Manor in a veil of gray that seemed to breathe with the weight of memory. The estate, perched upon a gentle hill overlooking the Long Island Sound, had witnessed 3 generations of the Ashworth family rise from humble textile merchants to one of the most prominent dynasties on the eastern seaboard. Its Georgian columns, weathered to the color of old bone, stood sentinel against the darkening sky as a black Rolls-Royce turned onto the winding gravel drive. William Ashworth III, known to New England society as the Duke for his bearing and the vast empire he commanded, pressed his forehead against the cold window glass. The nickname had followed him since prep school at Choate, a jest that became prophecy, for he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who understood that true power lay not in its display, but in its restraint. At 47, threads of silver traced through his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes spoke of boardrooms and battles fought in silence, of decisions that shaped the fortunes of thousands. He had been away for 3 weeks, first to Boston for the merger negotiations that would secure the company's future, then to New York for meetings he could no longer postpone. The telegram from his wife had reached him at the Waldorf, its words sparse yet weighted with something he could not name. "Come home when you can. All is well. Eleanor." All is well. The phrase troubled him during the entire train journey back. Eleanor never wrote unless something demanded expression, and even then, her letters were novels of observation and feeling, not telegrams of 3 sentences. He had telephoned twice, but the housekeeper reported that Mrs. Ashworth was occupied with household matters and could not come to the line. Household matters. Eleanor, who had not lifted so much as a teacup without assistance since their wedding day 23 years ago. The car rolled to a stop before the main entrance, and William did not wait for the driver. He stepped out into the rain, his wool overcoat darkening at the shoulders as he climbed the stone steps. The heavy oak door was unlocked, unusual for this hour, and he pushed it open to find the grand foyer silent, the chandelier's crystals catching the last gray light of afternoon. "Eleanor?" His voice echoed against the marble floor, absorbed by the tapestries that lined the walls. No answer. No hurried footsteps of the butler, no distant clink of china from the kitchen wing. The house breathed around him, alive yet holding its breath, as though it too waited for something he could not yet see. He moved through the parlor, past the library where leather-bound volumes stood in patient rows, through the music room where Eleanor's untouched piano gleamed beneath its dust cover. It was not until he reached the corridor leading to the east wing that he heard it. A rhythmic sound, soft yet persistent, like the whisper of waves upon sand. The nursery. The sound came from the nursery. His heart contracted. They had closed that wing 5 years ago, after the stillbirth that had shattered Eleanor's spirit and left them both wandering through their marriage like ghosts through familiar rooms. The doctors had said there would be no more children, and Eleanor had retreated into charity work and garden committees, filling her days with the business of others to avoid the silence of her own heart. William walked toward the sound, his footsteps quickening despite himself. The corridor smelled of lemon oil and fresh paint, scents that had not lived in this part of the house for half a decade. The door to the nursery stood ajar, and what he saw when he pushed it open stopped him as completely as if he had been struck. Eleanor knelt upon the hardwood floor, a scrub brush in her hand, her auburn hair loosened from its pins and falling in waves across her shoulders. She wore a simple cotton dress, the kind she had not owned since before their wedding, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, her forearms glistening with soap and water. The nursery, which he remembered as a tomb of dust and covered furniture, had been transformed. The walls were freshly painted in soft yellow, the color of morning light. New curtains hung at the windows, white with delicate embroidery. A cradle stood in the corner, draped with hand-stitched quilts. Eleanor. Her name left his lips as barely more than breath. She turned, and in her face he saw something he had not seen in years. Hope. Not the brittle hope that breaks at the first wind, but the deep-rooted hope that has survived its own death and returned stronger. Her eyes were red from crying, but she smiled in a way that transformed her entire being, that made her once again the girl he had fallen in love with at the Hartford cotillion 25 years ago. William. She set down the brush and rose to her feet, soap suds dripping from her fingers. I did not expect you until tomorrow. What is this? He gestured at the room, at her, at everything that had changed in the 3 weeks of his absence. Eleanor, what has happened? She crossed to him and took his hands in hers, heedless of the water and soap. Her grip was firm, alive with purpose. 3 weeks ago, she said, 2 days after you left for Boston, I received a telephone call from Father Murphy at St. Catherine's. There was a baby, a newborn girl, left on the steps of the church. The mother was young, unmarried, frightened. She had come from the city, given birth in a boarding house, and disappeared before dawn. The child had no one. William's chest tightened. He knew where this was going, and the knowing brought with it a wave of emotion so powerful he had to steady himself against the doorframe. I went to see her, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling but resolute. I told myself I was only going to help arrange for her care, to find a proper family. But when I held her, William, when I held her in my arms and she looked up at me with those dark eyes, I knew she was ours. I knew she had been sent to us. Eleanor, I have already spoken with the lawyers. The mother signed the relinquishment papers before she left. Father Murphy has given his blessing. The adoption can be finalized within the month. She paused, searching his face for the reaction she feared. I should have waited. I should have consulted you first. But I could not. I could not let her go, William. I could not let another child slip away from us. For a long moment, William could not speak. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw not the polished hostess of society dinners, not the fragile woman who had retreated into grief, but the fierce and loving heart he had married. She had acted without him because she had learned, in the long years of his absence, to act alone. And yet here she was, offering him the chance to join her in this most profound of decisions. Where is she? He asked at last. Eleanor's face transformed with relief and joy. In the morning room, Margaret is watching her. She led him through the corridor, her hand never leaving his, and William felt the years of distance between them begin to dissolve like frost before the sun. The morning room was warm with firelight, and Margaret, their housekeeper of 30 years, rose from the rocking chair where she sat with a bundle of blankets in her arms. Mr. Ashworth, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. It is good to have you home, sir. But William's eyes were fixed on the bundle, on the small, perfect face that emerged from the blankets, on the rosebud mouth, and the dark lashes that rested against cheeks the color of cream. The baby slept with the absolute peace of the innocent, unaware of the world's cruelties, trusting in the warmth that surrounded her. Eleanor lifted the child from Margaret's arms and turned to her husband. Her name is Charlotte, she said softly. Charlotte Grace Ashworth. William reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the baby's cheek with his fingertip. Charlotte stirred, her eyes opening, dark blue like the sound at twilight, and she gazed up at him with the unguarded wonder of new life. And William Ashworth III, the Duke of Connecticut society, The man who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated with titans of industry without flinching, felt tears stream down his face. He wept for the child they had lost, for the years of silent grief, for the miracle of second chances. He wept because his wife had found the courage to hope again, and in doing so, had given them both a future he had believed forever lost. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She is ours." Eleanor leaned into him, and together they stood in the firelight, the three of them, a family at last. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the windows clean, preparing the world for a new beginning. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If stories that touch the deepest corners of your heart and remind you that hope can be reborn from the ashes of grief are the kind of stories you cherish, then this is where you belong. The days that followed William's return were filled with a warmth that Ashworth Manor had not known in years. The east wing, once sealed like a wound too painful to expose, now breathed with life. Charlotte's cries and coos echoed through the corridors, and the servants moved with renewed purpose, their footsteps lighter, their conversations touched with the particular joy that only a child can bring to a house long starved of laughter. Eleanor devoted herself to Charlotte with the fierce tenderness of a woman who has waited a lifetime for this moment. She refused to hire a nurse, insisting on caring for the child herself, feeding her, bathing her, walking her through the long nights when teething or dreams interrupted her sleep. William observed his wife's transformation with wonder and gratitude, marveling at the strength she had discovered within herself during his absence. Yet even as happiness settled over the manor like the first snow of winter, there were shadows that refused to disperse. It began with a letter. 3 weeks after William's return, as December pressed its cold hands against the windows and the garden surrendered to frost, a letter arrived bearing a New York postmark and no return address. Margaret brought it to William in his study, her face troubled. "This came with the morning post, sir. I thought you should see it privately." William took the envelope and noted the careful, feminine hand that had written his name. He waited until Margaret had closed the door before slicing it open with his letter opener. The words inside struck him like a blow. "Mr. Ashworth, you do not know me, but I know you. I know about the child you have taken into your home, the child you believe to be an orphan. I am her mother. I did not abandon her willingly. I was forced to give her up by circumstances beyond my control. But I have not forgotten her, and I will not allow strangers to raise my daughter. I want her back. You will hear from me again." The letter was unsigned. William read it 3 times, his heart hammering against his ribs. The words blurred and reformed, each reading yielding new terrors. He thought of Eleanor, of the light that had returned to her eyes, of the purpose that had restored her spirit. If this letter was genuine, if the mother had changed her mind, the law might compel them to return Charlotte. And if that happened, William knew with cold certainty that Eleanor would not survive it. Not this time. He considered, for one dark moment, burning the letter and pretending it had never arrived. He could protect Eleanor from this knowledge, shield her from fear until he had determined whether the threat was real. But even as the thought formed, he rejected it. Their marriage had nearly perished from the silence between them, the unspoken griefs, the carefully maintained distances. He would not rebuild it on lies. That evening, after Charlotte had been settled in her cradle and the house had fallen into its nighttime quiet, William found Eleanor in the nursery, arranging a mobile of painted wooden stars above the baby's bed. "Eleanor, we need to talk." Something in his voice made her turn, her hands falling still. "What is it?" He handed her the letter without preamble. He watched her face as she read it, watched the color drain from her cheeks and the light dim in her eyes. When she finished, her hands were shaking. "It cannot be," she whispered. "The papers were signed. Father Murphy said the mother wanted the child to have a better life, that she had no intention of returning." "I know." "Then this must be a hoax. Someone seeking money, perhaps. We are wealthy. We are targets for such schemes." "Perhaps." William took the letter gently from her hands. "But we cannot ignore it. I will speak with Father Murphy tomorrow, and I will have Harrington look into the matter. If there is any truth to this, we must know." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "William, if they take her from us, they will not." He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "I will not allow it. Whatever this is, whoever sent this letter, I will find them. And I will protect our family." She clung to him, and for a long moment they stood together in the nursery, the silence broken only by Charlotte's soft breathing and the distant howl of the winter wind. William stroked his wife's hair and made promises he was not certain he could keep. But in that moment, the promises mattered less than the making of them. The declaration that they would face this together, that the family they had built would not be torn apart without a fight. The next morning, William drove to St. Catherine's through a light snowfall that dusted the Connecticut roads with white. The church stood at the edge of town, its stone walls gray against the gray sky, its steeple pointing upward like a prayer made solid. Father Murphy received him in a small office cluttered with books and papers, the smell of candle wax and old incense hanging in the air. "Mr. Ashworth." The priest rose to shake his hand, his expression kind but weary. "I had a feeling I might see you soon." "You've received a letter as well." Father Murphy nodded and gestured to a chair. "2 days ago. The same vague threats, the same unsigned claims. I have been praying for guidance ever since." William sat heavily, the weight of his anxiety pressing upon his shoulders. "What do you know of the mother, Father? Who was she? Where did she come from?" The priest folded his hands on his desk, his gaze troubled. "She came to me 3 days before she gave birth. She was young, no more than 20, I would guess, and clearly from modest circumstances. She said she had come from Brooklyn, that the father of the child was a married man who had cast her out when he learned of her condition. She was terrified, desperate. She had no money, no family, no place to go. And you helped her. I found her a room at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house and arranged for a midwife to attend the birth. The child came early, on a cold night much like this one. The mother held her for perhaps an hour, weeping the entire time. And then she asked me to take the baby. She said she could not care for her, that the child deserved better than a life of poverty and shame. She signed the relinquishment papers that very night. Did she leave a name? An address? Father Murphy hesitated. She called herself Mary, no surname. She refused to provide any information that might allow her to be traced. I did not press her. It was clear she had made her decision, and I thought, God forgive me, that a clean break would be best for everyone. William leaned forward. Father, the letter claims she was forced to give up the child, that she did not act willingly. The priest's face darkened with sorrow. I saw no evidence of coercion. She was alone when she came to me, alone when she made her decision. If someone forced her hand, it was not in my presence. Then who sent the letter? Who is claiming to be the mother now? I do not know, but I have a suspicion. Father Murphy reached into his desk and withdrew a worn photograph, which he slid across to William. 2 weeks after the child was placed with you and Mrs. Ashworth, a man came to the church asking about her. He said he was the child's uncle, that the family wanted to raise her themselves. But something in his manner disturbed me. He was too eager, too calculating. I told him the child had been adopted by a family who wished to remain anonymous. He left angry, but I have not seen him since. William studied the photograph. It showed a young man, perhaps 30, with sharp features and cold eyes. Do you know his name? He gave the name Thomas Riley. Whether that is his true name, I cannot say. William pocketed the photograph and rose. Thank you, Father. You have been most helpful. Mr. Ashworth. The priest's voice stopped him at the door. I have watched your wife transform since she took that child into her arms. I have seen hope return to her where only grief once lived. Whatever darkness is reaching for your family, I pray you have the strength to face it. As do I, Father. As do I. William drove home through the thickening snow, his mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. A mother who vanished, a man claiming to be family, letters unsigned yet threatening. Someone wanted Charlotte, wanted her badly enough to pursue her even after the adoption had been finalized. But why? What could a child born in poverty and abandoned in desperation possibly be worth to anyone? Unless, William thought, she was worth something he did not yet understand. He would find Thomas Riley. He would discover the truth. And he would protect his family no matter the cost. The snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white, and the manor appeared through the storm like a promise. Warm light glowing from its windows, smoke curling from its chimneys. Charlotte's cry echoing faintly as Eleanor lifted her from her cradle. Home. Family. Everything worth fighting for. December deepened, and with it came the rituals of the season. The evergreen wreaths hung upon every door, the smell of cinnamon and cloves drifting from the kitchen, the careful selection of gifts, and the writing of cards to distant relations. Eleanor threw herself into the preparations with an energy that bordered on feverish, as though the brightness of the holidays could dispel the shadows that had begun to gather at the edges of their happiness. William, meanwhile, pursued his investigation with the quiet determination that had built his empire. He engaged Harrington, his most trusted attorney, to trace Thomas Riley through the New York directories. He hired a private detective, a former Pinkerton man named Sullivan, to make discreet inquiries in Brooklyn. And he waited for answers, for another letter, for the threat to take a shape he could fight. The first break came on the 12th of December. Sullivan appeared at the manor just as the grandfather clock in the foyer struck 10, his heavy coat dusted with snow, his face reddened by the cold. William received him in the study, closing the door against the sounds of the household. I've found her, Mr. Ashworth. Sullivan withdrew a folder from his coat and laid it on the desk. The mother. Her real name is Mary Catherine Doyle. She's 22 years old, born in Dublin, emigrated to New York with her parents when she was 12. The family settled in Brooklyn, Flatbush to be precise. Father was a dock worker until he died of tuberculosis 3 years ago. Mother took in laundry to survive. Mary worked as a seamstress in a garment factory until 6 months ago, when she... well, you know the rest. William opened the folder and found himself looking at a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and a face that bore the marks of hardship and sorrow. She was thin, almost gaunt, but there was a dignity in her bearing, a stubborn pride in the set of her jaw. And the father of the child? Sullivan's expression hardened. That's where it gets interesting. The father is a man named Cornelius Van Doren. William felt the blood drain from his face. Van Doren? Of the Van Doren banking family? The same. Cornelius is the youngest son. You know the type. Spoiled, reckless, accustomed to taking what he wants without consequences. He met Mary Doyle at a charity event where she was working as a server. According to my sources, he pursued her relentlessly, made promises he never intended to keep. When she became pregnant, he panicked, paid her off with $200 and told her to disappear. Good God. It gets worse. Mary's been in a sanatorium in upstate New York for the past 2 months. Tuberculosis, like her father. She's too ill to write letters, too ill to pursue custody. Patrick has been acting entirely on his own, using her name without her knowledge or consent. William closed the folder, his mind racing. So the letters are extortion, nothing more. Mary Doyle has no legal claim and no desire to reclaim the child. That's my assessment, sir. Patrick Doyle is a con man looking for a payday. He has no standing in court, no documentation, nothing but threats. Relief flooded through William, but with it came something else, something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. Sullivan. This woman, Mary Doyle. She gave up her child because she had no choice. Because a wealthy man used her and discarded her, and society offered her no protection. And now she lies dying in a sanatorium while her brother exploits her tragedy for money. Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. That's about the size of it, sir. William was silent for a long moment. Through the study window he could see Eleanor in the garden, walking with Charlotte bundled against the cold, pointing at the cardinals that flashed red against the snow. His wife's laughter carried faintly through the glass, a sound he had not heard in years. I want you to find Mary Doyle, William said at last. I want to know which sanatorium, and I want to know her condition. Can you do that? Already done, sir. She's at the Adirondack Cottage Sanatorium in Saranac Lake. The doctors say her prognosis is uncertain. William nodded slowly. Thank you, Sullivan. That will be all for now. After the detective had gone, William remained at his desk, staring at the photograph of Mary Doyle. She had given Eleanor the greatest gift imaginable, a child to love, a purpose to live for. And in return, she lay alone in a cold sanatorium, abandoned by everyone except a brother who saw her only as a means to profit. It was not right. It was not just. And William Ashworth, for all his power and privilege, had built his life on the belief that a man must answer for the injustices he has the power to correct. That evening, William told Eleanor everything. They sat together in the nursery, Charlotte sleeping peacefully between them, and he laid out the entire story. Mary Doyle, Cornelius Van Doren, Patrick's extortion scheme, the sanatorium in Saranac Lake. Eleanor listened in silence, her face cycling through shock, anger, and finally, a deep and abiding sorrow. That poor woman, she whispered when he had finished. She gave us everything, and we did not even know her name. I want to help her, Eleanor. I want to pay for her treatment, ensure she has the best care available. Not because I fear her claim to Charlotte, she has none and wants none, but because it is the right thing to do. Eleanor reached across the cradle and took his hand. Of course we must help her. How could we do otherwise? There is something else. William hesitated, knowing that what he was about to propose would test the limits of his wife's newfound happiness. If Mary recovers, and the doctors say there is a chance with proper treatment, I believe she should know what became of her daughter. Not to take her back, but to have peace. To know that Charlotte is loved and safe and wanted. Eleanor's grip tightened on his hand. For a long moment she said nothing, and William could see the war playing out behind her eyes. The mother's instinct to protect, to guard, to keep what was hers against all comers. But Eleanor Ashworth had learned something in the long years of grief. That love, true love, could not be diminished by sharing it. That the heart was not a finite vessel, but an infinite one, capable of expanding to embrace all those who needed its warmth. "Yes," she said at last, her voice steady. "If she recovers, she should know. Charlotte will have questions someday, about where she came from, about the woman who gave her life. And when that day comes, I want to be able to tell her the truth. All of it." William raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You are remarkable, Eleanor. You always have been." She smiled through her tears. "I am only a woman who has learned that second chances are too precious to waste." If this story has touched something deep within you, if you feel the weight of these words in your chest, leave a comment saying, "Love finds a way." Let me know that you understand what it means to hope against hope, to find family in the most unexpected places. January arrived with bitter winds that swept down from Canada, turning the Sound to gray steel and the gardens to a landscape of ice and silence. But inside Ashworth Manor, warmth persisted. In the fires that burned in every hearth, in the laughter that echoed through the halls, in the small miracles of daily life with a child, Charlotte grew stronger with each passing week, her dark eyes brightening with recognition when Eleanor lifted her from the cradle, her small hands reaching for William's face when he bent to kiss her goodnight. She was, in every way that mattered, their daughter, bound to them not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by love, by the deliberate decision to become a family. William had dealt with Patrick Doyle swiftly and decisively. A meeting arranged through intermediaries, a conversation conducted in the back room of a Manhattan hotel. No threats were necessary, only the quiet presentation of facts. William knew about the extortion scheme. He knew about Patrick's criminal history, his gambling debts, his outstanding warrants. He knew enough to send Patrick to prison for a very long time. Patrick Doyle was not a brave man. Faced with the choice between prosecution and disappearance, he chose the latter. He boarded a ship for Liverpool that same week and was not heard from again. But the matter of Mary Doyle remained. William had arranged for her transfer to a private sanatorium in Connecticut, closer to the manor, where the finest physicians in New England could attend to her care. The treatment was expensive: experimental drugs, specialized nurses, mountain air and rest. But money was the one thing William had in abundance. He spent it freely, asking nothing in return. By February, the doctors reported improvement. Mary's fever had broken. Her lungs, though scarred, were healing. She was able to sit up in bed, to take short walks in the sanatorium garden, to speak without the racking coughs that had plagued her for months. And she had asked, quietly and persistently, to know what had happened to her daughter. Eleanor was the one who decided to go. "I must," she told William on the morning of her departure. "She deserves to hear it from me, the woman who is raising her child. She deserves to see my face and know that Charlotte is loved. I could come with you." "No." Eleanor touched his cheek gently. "This is something I must do alone. Woman to woman, mother to mother. You understand?" He did understand, though it pained him to let her go. He watched from the window as her car disappeared down the snow-covered drive, and he spent the hours of her absence pacing the library, unable to concentrate on work or reading or anything except the meeting that was taking place in the sanatorium. Eleanor returned as the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. William met her at the door, searching her face for signs of distress, but what he found instead was a peace he had not seen in her since before their own child was lost. "Tell me," he said, leading her to the parlor where a fire crackled in the hearth. Eleanor sat heavily, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant with memory. "She is younger than I imagined." younger and sadder and stronger than anyone her age should have to be. She has been through so much, William. Poverty, abandonment, illness, betrayal. And yet when she spoke of Charlotte, there was no bitterness, only love. What did she say? She thanked me. Eleanor's voice trembled. She thanked me for giving her daughter the life she could not provide. She said she had prayed every night that Charlotte would find a family who would cherish her, and that God had answered her prayers beyond anything she could have hoped. William sat beside his wife and took her hands in his. And did you tell her about us, about the manor, about our lives? I told her everything. I told her about the child we lost, about the years of grief, about the telegram that brought me to St. Catherine's on the coldest night of the year. I told her that Charlotte had saved us, saved our marriage, saved my life, and I told her that she, Mary, had given us a gift we could never repay. How did she respond? Eleanor smiled through her tears. She asked if she could see a photograph. I had brought one. Charlotte in her christening gown taken last month at the church. Mary held it for a long time, just looking, and then she pressed it to her heart and wept. Not from sorrow, William. From relief, from the knowledge that her sacrifice had not been in vain. They sat together in silence as the fire burned low, two people who had learned that family was not defined by blood but by choice, by the daily decision to love, to forgive, to remain. There is one more thing, Eleanor said at last. I invited her to the manor. When she is well enough to travel, I invited her to come and see Charlotte, to hold her, if only once, and to know that she will always have a place in our lives. William considered this, the complications it might bring, the questions it might raise, the boundaries it might blur. But he looked at his wife's face, radiant with the rightness of what she had done, and he knew there was only one answer. Of course, he said, she is welcome here. She will always be welcome here. Spring came late to Connecticut that year, as though winter was reluctant to release its grip on the land. But when it finally arrived, it came with a vengeance, bursting from the frozen earth in explosions of green and gold, filling the air with bird song and the scent of renewal. Mary Doyle arrived at Ashworth Manor on a morning in late April, when the dogwoods were in bloom and the gardens had shaken off the last of their winter sleep. She came in a car sent by William, accompanied by a nurse from the sanatorium, who had become her friend during the long months of recovery. Eleanor greeted her at the door, Charlotte in her arms. For a long moment, the two women simply looked at each other, the one who had given birth, the one who had given a home. There were no words adequate to the moment, no phrases that could capture the weight of what passed between them. Then Mary reached out, her hand trembling, and touched Charlotte's cheek. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, my sweet girl." Charlotte, now 6 months old and bright with curiosity, gazed at the stranger with solemn interest. She reached for Mary's finger and gripped it tight, and Mary laughed, a sound so filled with joy and sorrow that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "She has your eyes," Eleanor said softly. "I see it now. She has your eyes." "She has your love," Mary replied. "That is what matters. That is everything." They spent the day together, the three of them, walking through the gardens and sitting in the nursery and sharing the stories that had brought them to this impossible moment. Mary spoke of her childhood in Dublin, of the crossing to America, of her father's gentle hands and her mother's fierce determination to survive. She spoke of Cornelius Van Doren without bitterness, only with the weary acceptance of a woman who had long since made peace with the cruelties of men. "I do not blame him," she said. "I did once, but blame is a poison that kills only the one who drinks it. I have chosen to let it go." Eleanor listened and marveled at the wisdom contained in this slight, scarred woman who had endured more in 22 years than most people experienced in a lifetime. Here was strength, not the loud, aggressive strength of the powerful, but the quiet, enduring strength of those who survive. William joined them for dinner, and the conversation turned to practical matters. Mary's health was improving, but she was not yet strong enough to work. Her mother was aging, struggling to maintain the small apartment in Brooklyn on the meager income from taking in laundry. The future was uncertain, fraught with the precariousness that plagued all those who lived without the cushion of wealth. "I have a proposal," William said, setting down his wine glass. "Eleanor and I have discussed it at length, and we would like to offer you a position here at the manor. Not as a servant, as a member of the household. You could help with Charlotte's care, continue your recovery in the country air, and begin to build a new life. Your mother would be welcome as well. There is a cottage on the grounds, empty since our gardener passed. It could be made comfortable." Mary stared at him, her face pale with shock. "Mr. Ashworth, I cannot—" "You can," Eleanor said firmly. "You can, and you should. This is not charity, Mary. This is family. You gave us Charlotte. Let us give you this." The silence stretched, heavy with emotion. Mary looked from Eleanor to William to Charlotte, who sat in her high chair, babbling happily and smearing mashed peas across her face. And then slowly she nodded. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I do not have words." "You do not need words," Eleanor replied. "You only need to say yes." "Yes." Mary wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." 1 year later, the dogwoods bloomed again. Ashworth Manor had changed in ways both visible and invisible. The East Wing, once a tomb of grief, now rang with the sounds of a child learning to walk, to talk, to laugh. Charlotte, 18 months old and fearless, toddled through the gardens with Mary at her side, chasing butterflies and picking flowers, and filling the spring air with her delighted shrieks. Mary's mother, Bridget Doyle, had taken charge of the kitchen garden with the same fierce determination she had once applied to survival in Brooklyn. Under her care, tomatoes and peppers and herbs flourished in neat rows, and the manor's cook had learned more about Irish cooking in 6 months than she had known in 30 years of service. Mary herself had blossomed. The color had returned to her cheeks, the strength to her limbs. She had taken courses at the local college, literature and history, the education she had been denied as a child. And she read to Charlotte every night, filling the nursery with stories of heroes and magic and the triumph of good over evil. And Eleanor had found what she had sought for so long: peace. She stood now at the nursery window, watching Mary and Charlotte in the garden below. William came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "It is strange," Eleanor said softly. "I spent so many years believing that happiness was something that had been taken from me, something I could never reclaim. And now, looking at them, I realized that happiness was always waiting. I simply had to be brave enough to reach for it." "You were brave," William said. "You are brave. You opened our home and our hearts to strangers, and in doing so, you created a family. We created it together." Below, Charlotte stumbled and fell, her wail rising sharply. Mary scooped her up immediately, kissing her tears away, and within moments the child was laughing again, reaching for a passing butterfly with chubby fingers. "She will have questions someday," Eleanor said. "About where she came from, about Mary, about all of it. Yes, and we will tell her the truth." "The whole truth?" "The whole truth." William turned Eleanor to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. We will tell her that she was born from love, even if that love was imperfect. We will tell her that she was given to us by a woman who loved her enough to let her go. And we will tell her that family is not a matter of blood, but of choice. The daily, deliberate choice to care for one another, to forgive one another, to remain. Eleanor leaned into him, her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. I love you, William. And I love you, Eleanor. More than I have words to say. They stood together at the window as the spring sun rose higher, bathing the garden in golden light. Charlotte's laughter drifted up to them, mingling with Mary's gentle voice and the distant song of birds welcoming the new day. It was, in every way that mattered, a perfect morning. The summer garden party had become an annual tradition at Ashworth Manor, a gathering of neighbors and friends, of society acquaintances and genuine companions, all mingling beneath white tents on the great lawn, while children chased each other through the hedgerows and the orchestra played waltzes from the gazebo. Charlotte, now 6 years old, stood on a small stage that had been erected near the rose garden, her dark hair braided with ribbons, her face shining with nervous excitement. She was about to recite a poem she had memorized for the occasion, a selection from Wordsworth that Mary had taught her, about daffodils and wandering clouds and the bliss of solitude. Eleanor sat in the front row, her hand clasped tightly in William's. Beside them sat Bridget Doyle, her weathered face soft with pride. And next to Bridget sat Mary, no longer the gaunt, desperate woman who had appeared at the church 7 years ago, but a confident, educated woman who had found her place in the world. I wandered lonely as a cloud, Charlotte began, her voice clear and strong, that floats on high o'er vales and hills. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the telegram that had changed everything. Gratitude for the courage she had found within herself. Gratitude for the man beside her who had never stopped believing in second chances. Charlotte finished her recitation to enthusiastic applause. She curtsied, beaming, and then ran from the stage directly into Eleanor's arms. Did I do well, Mama? Did I make you proud? You did beautifully, my darling. You always make me proud. Over Charlotte's head, Eleanor's eyes met Mary's. A look passed between them, a look of understanding, of shared history, of the strange and beautiful bond that had formed between two women who loved the same child. Mary smiled and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Eleanor smiled back and mouthed her reply, "Thank you." For in the end, that was the truth of their story, not a tale of one woman's sacrifice or another woman's gain, but of 2 mothers who had found in each other the grace to share, to trust, to build something larger than either could have created alone. The orchestra struck up a new waltz. William rose and offered Eleanor his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Ashworth?" She laughed, the bright, free laugh of a woman who has learned that joy is not a destination, but a choice. "You may, Mr. Ashworth. You may always." They moved on to the lawn, 2 figures in the golden afternoon light, and the guests watched them with the quiet approval reserved for couples who have weathered storms and emerged stronger. Charlotte ran to join Mary in the rose garden, and Bridget poured herself another cup of tea, and the summer afternoon unfolded in all its peaceful, ordinary glory. This was Ashworth Manor. This was family. This was home. And it had all begun with a woman on her knees, scrubbing a nursery floor, preparing a room for a child she had not yet met, driven by a hope so fierce it could not be denied. Some miracles are announced by angels. Others arrive in telegrams, in chance encounters, in the small decisions that change everything. But all of them, in the end, are answered by love. If you watched until here, it's because this story touched your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who you are and who truly loves the stories on this channel. If this story moved you, please leave your like. It helps more people discover these tales that are made with so much care and dedication. And if you know someone who needs to hear that second chances are real, that family is a choice, and that love always finds a way, please share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until the next story.